homeland, fatherland, nation. What meaning do these terms have in our present day? In some countries, they seem like relics of forgotten times. But in others, they are ubiquitous in politics and society. One of these countries is Turkey. The reason for this is rooted in its past. Like any great civilization, the history of the early Turks began small and inconspicuous. They had to fight for freedom before they even became visible on the world stage. But the Turks' origins are not in Anatolia, which they have inhabited for a millennium, but deep in the heart of Asia. Their story began with a tribe that has long been forgotten, the Ashina. This tribe consisted of people who fled from an invasion of Chinese armies and had to rebuild their home. Soon the Ashina mingled with the surrounding Turkic tribes. In the process, they learned metallurgy and the art of war, and planned their retaliation. But for some time they remained vassals of more powerful empires. Two brothers, politically educated and military experienced, took over the leadership of the tribe and started a revolution. They rebelled against the Mongol and Chinese feudal lords of the time, and led their family to political and economic independence. In the process, they mobilized the strength that had always lain dormant deep in the steppe, and led men and women alike into battle. In a very short time, they also broke the chains of all other tribes that spoke Turkish and, as their new leaders, expanded in all directions. The Ashina thus created within a few years, and long before the Ottomans and Seljuks, a Turkic empire that stretched from Korea and Manchuria in Asia to the Crimean Peninsula in Europe. Their empire became even larger than that of the Ottomans a millennium later. They gave themselves the name Turk. But these new lords of the steppe were different from the Huns and the Mongols. Their rulers invoked ancient Turkic traditions such as Tengrism, the original religion of the Turkic peoples, and did not stop at the usual borders of the Eurasian steppe. Byzantines, Persians, Koreans and Chinese had to deal with an empire that possessed both diplomatic skill and military power. This is their story. Welcome to the rise of the Celestial Turks. The Turks have lived in Anatolia for more than 1,000 years. Their country, Turkey, is known for its geographical, but also cultural diversity, and forms a bridge between East and West. Here, over time, world religions and people from all over the world met, and formed a melting pot of cultures. Every visitor can experience flowing transitions between tradition and modernity, from modern to Diyarbakir. And yet the specific influence of Turkish culture cannot be overlooked. The Turks are known for their national pride and their will to fight, but also for their delicious food, their coffee and tea, and cultural dispositions such as hospitality and family cohesion. They began the settlement of Anatolia after the victory of Sultan Alp Arslan of the Seljuks over Byzantium, and established a world empire that reached to the gates of Vienna under the name of Osman. But there is a peculiarity which had strongly marked the Turks until their arrival in Anatolia. Their cultural past has been marked by many changes and their appearance may have changed, but the Turks in Turkey speak a language and maintain a culture whose origins lie elsewhere. And this is a special characteristic of all Turkic peoples. They never lived in one place for too long. This map from the 11th century illustrates this. For thousands of years, so-called Turkic peoples, groups that spoke one of the many Turkic languages, lived all over Eurasia. Instead of being united in an empire, they were grouped into smaller federations, and some tribes were even in isolation from all others. The Turks of that time stayed in the Eurasian steppe belt, which has diverse geographical features from Ukraine to Mongolia. On the path to the interior of Asia, the steppe leads us to the place that became known as the origin of all Turks, equal to their dialect and way of life, to the legendary Altai. This region includes both green landscapes with many rivers and valleys and a mountain range that stretches across the entire area. Known in Chinese as Tian Shan, the highest peak is Tengri Khan, named after the ruler of heaven in Turkic mythology. This golden mountain is located in a border region that is currently divided among 4 countries. From here, it is over 4,000 kilometers distance to Ankara, the capital of Turkey. How and why did the Turks migrate so far away to the west? In the nearer vicinity, in countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and also in the northeast and south of Russia, are people who are also classified as Turkic. But away from Asia, besides the Anatolian Turks, other ethnic groups have migrated far away. For example, the Gagauz of Romania, the Turkmen of Syria and Iraq, or the Tatars of Crimea. These people are not 100% purely Turkish in origin, because genealogy has shown that they are descendants of many different ethnic groups. Turkic as an ethnicity emerged only over time, but their identity, shaped by language, tradition and religion, is precisely Turkic. This identity has endured for many centuries, and after the end of the Ottoman Empire in 1922 and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Turkic peoples, from Europe to Asia, began to become aware of the origin of their social order. Nevertheless, the question of why many more Turks live in these places today, rather than in the Altai region, is justified. It leads us to the history of the emergence of Turkic identity, to a story that relates to tragedy and hope at the same time, to the legend of Asina. As so often in history, wars between states or ethnic groups in Asia's late antiquity led to flight and displacement all over the place. South of the Altai is the Taklamakan Desert, an inhospitable place to live. On the northern ring, however, at the transition to the Altai, better living conditions prevailed. From the Tarim Basin to the Gaocheng region, that belt was dotted with many oasis towns. Many peoples, including Chinese and Indo-Iranians, lived and ruled here for over a millennia. In late antiquity, families descended from the legendary Huns had say here. In 439, Chinese dynasties began to expel these families. In one village, all the family members were even killed by the invaders, all except for a 10-year-old boy who managed to escape. However, the boy was injured and didn't get very far. That's when he came across a she-wolf who befriended him. The ruler of the invaders learned of this and ordered his soldiers to kill the boy as well as the she-wolf, but the she-wolf fled with the boy at inhospitable speed to a mountain, north of the Gaocheng region. They arrived at the Altai. She housed him at a cave surrounded by a plain with rich vegetation. The she-wolf fed the boy and watched him grow into a man. At some point, the two merged, and she gave birth to 10 little boys, who then grew into strong men. In adulthood, these 10 left the cave area and mingled with the surrounding villages. Each of them in turn had children, and so an extended family of 700 came to be. They all bore the name Ashina, in honor of their mother, who was called Asina. The symbol of the wolf has been omnipresent in Turkish literature and in some political circles ever since. But Asina was not a grey wolf as often told, but a blue wolf. Blue because of her fur, which shimmered bluish when the boy saw her. And because of her connection to Gokturk, the ruler of the eternal blue sky, who, acting as a god, had brought Asina to earth to save the boy from death. With new courage, the Ashina men learned the art of war and took revenge on their father's enemies. The legend of Asina at this moment passes to the legend of Ergin Khan. The protective mountain ranges, where the boy and the she-wolf had taken refuge, represented the only protection of the family from the enemies. A blacksmith, presumably one of the 10 sons, made a hammer with the help of which the men could smash the mountain range and clear the way. This opened the gate to the outside world. This moment was the mythical birth of the Turk. So, the Turk was literally a wolf's son, and had a talent for forging metals, with which it was possible to make weapons. This story is a myth that is supposed to metaphorically explain the origin of the Turkic civilization. Interestingly, it has parallels with the origin stories of the Indo-Aryan Wuzan, who lived nearby, and even with that of the Romans. The city of Rome came into being after orphaned brothers Romulus and Remus were taken in and suckled by a she-wolf. The two grew up to be men, and Romulus created the city named after him. The wolf then played a not insignificant role in the collective consciousness of the Romans as a national animal, along with the eagle. For the Turks, in turn, the wolf has since then taken on a particularly important role in cosmology. It is the original national animal of all Turkic peoples. But the myth is based on a true incident. The special units of the Gokturks were called Boru, meaning wolves. Moreover, the rulers of the Gokturks held annual ceremonies in the ancestors' cave to commemorate the Ergin Khan legend. And the Chinese annals tell us about a historical event that could explain the background of the legend. The last Han princes in Gaochang, Wuhui and Anshu once fled north from an invading army and arrived in the Altai region, where they resettled with their families. There, they became vassals of the Rouran. The Turks, as is well known, had later also been their vassals, and coincidentally appear in the chronologies of Asia at the very time in Altai, in 439, when the last Huns disappeared from history. This is the origin of the claim by Chinese scholars that the Turks are the descendants of the ancient Huns. In any case, the real life of the Turks at that time was anything but mythical. Rather, it was exhausting and extremely routine. Turks in medieval Central Asia seem to have led a completely different life than people in modern Turkic republics. This includes, of course, their lifestyle of domestic and livestock farming. They lived not in houses but in yurts, large sturdy tents that could be dismantled and rebuilt elsewhere at any time. The yurt represented the center of Turkic nomadic life. In the winter, families used it to move to the warmer south, and in the summer months back to the north to escape the heat. The Turks practiced private economy by hunting animals, raising livestock, plantations, and participating in the lively trade along the ancient Silk Road. Hunting was essential for every member of the family. From an early age, every boy and girl learned to ride horses and hunt wild animals. Therefore, in the course of time, the Turks developed into excellent fighters who could handle bows and arrows better than, for example, the Romans or the Chinese. It was the same with the Huns before them and with the Mongols after them. This was the heritage of the steppe. Traditions gradually crystallized and were passed on from generation to generation, often in the form of drama and song. These traditions are summarized under the term Torah. In all those times, the Turks lived in connection with nature. And their Torah, in turn, was closely connected with their religion. Tengrism encompasses the belief in Tengri, the ruler of the eternal blue sky, a being that, unlike other religions, has not been personified. Tengri is an entity that sees and hears everything. However, Tengri is not explicitly a punitive god. If someone had lived a morally good life, they would be treated well in the afterlife. Someone who had consistently misbehaved would have to bear the consequences, and go through the many levels of the underworld, until they would have to answer to its godlike being, Erlik. This is the first aspect that makes Tengrism so unique. Despite its seemingly monotheistic orientation, there are many other divine beings such as Erlik or Umri, the protector of all unborn children and to be equated with Mother Earth. People whose souls were not at rest at death are reborn and given a second chance to live a decent life. The souls of all other people are partially transferred into things in nature. Trees, mountains, rivers and lakes are inhabited by the so-called earth-water spirits, who are supposed to ensure a balance between nature and man. Many Tengrist customs have survived and are still practiced in Turkic-speaking countries, from Turkey to Kazakhstan, among the Yakuts in Siberia as well as the Tatars in Crimea. Examples include certain rules of behavior after the birth of a child and before the funeral of a family member, the decorating of wishing trees, sacred numbers such as 7 and 40, and the shaman drum. The shaman did not play a central role in Tengrism. The ancient Turks were not shamanists, although the shaman performed important tasks. For example, he mastered herbalism and acted as a healer of the sick. He also had to perform ceremonial rites to contact Tengri and the other deities, and thus give advice to the ruler. In general, Tengrism is a harmonious balance of forces. Ideally, people should live in harmony with nature. They should not eat and drink more than necessary. They should not cause destruction to other peoples and should not exploit them or nature for their own benefit. Related to this is the acceptance of other religions. Tengrism was syncretic, meaning that its followers accepted aspects of other religions and even incorporated them into their beliefs, much like the Romans, Egyptians or Sumerians. The polytheistic character of the faith can be seen in the variety of deities or godlike beings that are firmly anchored in Turkish mythology, such as Kyra, who carries the soul of Tengri and watches over the universe. Alaz is the god of fire, who could purify the souls of people after their sojourn in the underworld. Uljan acted as Tengri's vice, stood for good, welfare and surplus of food and water. He is an opponent of Erlik. In an epic battle, Uljan was able to defeat Erlik, and from that moment he assumed the role of protector of the people. Isid, like Umri, was goddess of fertility and responsible for listing all newborns in the Golden Book of Destiny. While Ayata, god of the moon, dwelled on the 6th floor of the sky, along with Gun Anna, goddess of the sun. Values such as courage, modesty and justice were held in high esteem by the Turks as well as the Mongols and Huns. Equality between the Turkic woman and man was considered absolute. While most of the rulers of the Tengris states may have been male, women assumed roles not only as diplomats but also as generals and governors. For the most part, their roles were to maintain social order and strengthen cohesion among the people. The Chinese scholars, who wrote a great deal about the ancient Turks, found such emancipatory qualities unusual and even ridiculous. Nonetheless, they were amazed by the honesty that was widespread among the common people, from which they partly inferred the naivety and good nature of Turkic rulers. But the most important teaching of Tengrism is to learn from mistakes, to leave the past behind and to create a better future for oneself and one's family. Thus, everything that exists is part of an eternal cycle of life. For this reason, trees, like the tree of life, are sacred beings in Turkic mythology, along the wolf or the horse. Man is as much a part of this world as plants or animals, but unlike them, he can intentionally harm his environment. Therefore, he must observe certain rules in order to maintain the balance of power. Someone who must go to the underworld after death is not trapped there forever anyway. Instead, the souls are allowed to ascend to the afterlife after their punishment has been served, and settle on the 3rd floor of the afterlife. The afterlife and the underworld have each 7 floors. Tengri dwells on the highest floor of heaven, and Erlik on the last floor of the underworld. Connected to this is the idea of the tree of life, which connects heaven and underworld with earth, and allows ascent and descent between these dimensions. The Turks thus shared in their cosmology a concept that exists in the Scandinavian countries of Europe. And Tengri bears striking similarities to the Sumerian god Dinja and to Dais, the sky god of Indo-European mythology. In any case, Tengrism is not dogmatic. Someone who constantly praises Tengri but leads an antisocial life must pay Erlik a visit after death. But another human who would not have even prayed to Tengri or ever thought of him, perhaps even been a follower of other religions, but instead led a good life, would be rewarded by Tengri after death. The details of social order, meaning rights and prohibitions in a nation, must be worked out by the people among themselves. Tengrism merely provides the framework for coexistence. In this sense, Tengrism is less a religion, and more a philosophy of life. About 100 years after the flight to the Altai Mountains, the Ashina reappear in history. In the meantime, the clan had joined forces with the surrounding population, and nevertheless managed to hold its own against undesirable influences. But the leader of the Ashina, an elderly man named Tuwu, could not prevent the vassalization of the Ruran. The Ruran were the lords of the steppe at that time. They ruled over a territory that stretched from Manchuria to present-day Kazakhstan. Their ruler bore the title of Kargan, and saw himself as God's representative on earth. He looked down from his position on all those who lived in his realm and had to serve him. In addition to the Ashina, this included the Tila, a loose confederation of many Turkic tribes. Tuwu was not strong enough to put an end to this. But his son Bumin was fed up with the Kargan's rule, and especially with the lowly position of his family. In the year 545, he took over the leadership of the Ashina. At that time, the clan's members were known throughout the region as industrious blacksmiths who made their own weapons. Accordingly, Bumin set out on a customary raid into Chinese territory without the help of his Kargan. In northern China, 2 large families ruled, who were actually descendants of the ancient Huns. This Tuoba family had later split, and now the western Wei and northern Qi were hostile to each other. When the Ashina arrived in the Wei region, their chancellor, Yuan Tai, saw a unique opportunity. The young Bumin seemed ambitious and capable, and he was tired of Ruran rule, as were the Wei. Therefore, Yuan Tai approached him and proposed the establishment of trade relations. Bumin accepted the request, and thus began a secret alliance between the Ashina and the Wei. Shortly thereafter, a rebellion broke out among the Tila, threatening the rule of the Ruran. But the Khagan unexpectedly received help from the Ashina. Bümin crushed the revolt of the Tila Federation. He was the first to bring the 250,000-strong group of steppe warriors under his direct control. Afterwards, he sought out the Khagan and demanded the hand of his daughter, as a thank you for his efforts. But Anagui, the Khagan, refused, calling Bümin a lowly slavesmith. In doing so, Anagui had set off a chain of events that would result in his downfall. Bümin angrily broke off all relations with the Ruran, and instead asked for the hand of a Wei princess. Yuan-Tai agreed and sent the emperor's daughter, Changal, to the Ashina. The alliance of the two families was now complete, and with the Tila warriors in reserve, Bümin began a revolt of his own against the Ruran. Bümin's army defeated Anagui's forces in a great battle in Mongolia in 552. The defeat was so devastating that Anagui committed suicide, and his family fled to China. The Ruran were forced to retreat from the steppe and found refuge with the northern Qi, rivals of the Wei. Bümin now ascended to the vacant throne, assumed the title of Khagan, and founded his own empire, the Empire of the Turks. Princess Changal became Khagatun, or Hatun, a fellow empress, and the Ashina the new ruling dynasty of the Asian steppe. Within 6 years, Bümin had accomplished what the Ashina and other Turkic tribes could not do in 600. For the first time in history, a state emerged that was both inhabited and ruled by Turks. A state that became even larger than any steppe empire prior. The Ashina referred to themselves as Turuk, or Torok, from which the name Turk is derived. The name probably referred only to their own tribe. But they were not the only Turks around. Most of the ethnic groups of the Tila Federation, and other tribes and kingdoms of Eurasia, spoke the same language as the Ashina, Old Turkic. When Bümin's family extended their influence over the entire steppe, they too adopted the term Turk. Their language and traditions had already been the same. But now the Turks of the early Middle Ages were also, politically, united. Bümin was not the first Turkic ruler in history, but he was the first to demand to be called the ruler of the Turks. With the ambition to unite the other Turkic tribes of Asia under his banner, Bümin set to work with his brother, Istemi, to expand their realm. Together they led the Ashina family to fame and power. Their first great goal, however, lay not in Central Asia, China or Europe, but in Korea. Bümin wasted no time. With the Ashina Turkic nobility as his supporters and a large warrior caste in tow, he now controlled the entire Ruran territory, from Lake Alakol in Kazakhstan to the Gobi Desert, and the Tarim Basin to the Great Wall of China. The inhospitable north was claimed by autonomous tribes. In the south, he was confronted with two empires, whose leaders were of Han origin. He maintained a good relationship with the Western Wei, after they had indirectly supported him in the War of Independence. The northern Qi on the other hand were hostile to the Turks. But while the revolution against the Ruran was still underway, Bümin had already turned to his first foreign policy goal. For he wanted to take advantage of the general chaos in the region, and expand in as many directions as possible. The Koreans populated the outermost settlements on the coast to the Pacific, and had led an independent existence for centuries. The settlement area of the Koreans was divided into several empires. The southern part was ruled by states that competed in alternating coalitions. The north belonged to the dominion of the Goguryeo. This kingdom formed the pinnacle of Korean civilization. For 500 years, they ruled over northern Korea, Manchuria, and even parts of Mongolia. The Goguryeo had made contact with the Huns in ancient times, but this was stopped by the Han Chinese. Now, contact was again made with the steppe people. But the Turks did not come with peaceful intentions. In September of the year 551, an army of Turkic warriors appeared on the border of Goguryeo. The army laid siege to the settlement of Sinsong. It then moved on and attacked a major city nearby. King Yang I of Goguryeo then dispatched an army of 10,000 men. The Korean counterattack was successful, and the Turks retreated to the steppes. The first contact between Turks and Koreans had been hostile in nature. But this event later turned out to be a key moment for Turkish-Korean relations. Enemies would later become friends. For the moment, the Liao River represented the easternmost border of the Turkic Empire. At home, Bumin could look back on an empire with an impressive army and considerable territory, and in terms of power politics he was in no way inferior to his predecessor, Anagui. In the highest place of the political hierarchy was he himself, the Khagan, the emperor. The Turkic Empire was not built on an invasion from outside, but on an internal revolution. Therefore, Bumin did not tamper too much with the political structures of the steppe. The Ashina now provided the Shads and Tigins of the empire, princes and generals. In addition, the title of Beg existed among the ancient Turks. The Begs were tribal leaders of autonomous families. But after they had all become subordinate to the Khagan, the Begs no longer had autonomous foreign policy at their disposal. However, they did have the authority to lead military commands in the name of the Khagan. The term Beg developed into the honorary title of Bey later on. The Khagan's legitimacy was built on the support of the Begs. But his rule was indirect. Bumin appointed governors and tributary kings to maintain unity among the various tribes and peoples. His state is known to us today as the Empire of the Gokturks. Gok, in Turkish, stands for the color blue, and accordingly for the blue sky. The eastern direction of the sky was also symbolized by the blue. Gok comes from the original word kok, which also meant origin. Gokturks can therefore be translated as original, blue, and celestial Turks at the same time. Celestial, perhaps, because their leaders were chosen by Tengri to rule. The Khagan was treated like a sacred being, a ruler blessed by Tengri. To stand against the Khagan meant to stand against the will of Tengri. The Khagan had more kut than any other human being. Kut means sacred power or energy, and in terms of people, charisma, and luck. The Khagan's mobile residence was in Otukan, in a forest town from which the Kut emitted. Whoever ruled Otukan, the Kut bestowed victory and success against all enemies. This was also the condition for successful rule. However, Bumin died under mysterious circumstances shortly after founding his empire. Before his demise, he had made a momentous decision. Instead of one, there were to be two rulers in the Khaganate. Given the sheer size of the empire, this was imperative. But no dual kingship was established. Instead, the Khagan remained in Otukan, while another member of the Ashina was to take care of all the territories to the west. To establish the empire, it was Istemi, young brother of Bumin, who was given the title of viceroy. He had to recognize the authority of the Khagan over his domain. In case of doubt, the Khagan had the last word. After Bumin's death, his eldest son Kara became the new Khagan. And while Kara had to take care of the Rouran remnants that plagued the Gokturks' border region with China, his uncle Istemi was already on his way to Europe. Why did the Gokturks need to conquer new territories? Probably not out of boredom, because this region of the Eurasian steppe was already filled to the brim with numerous tribes and city-states. Convincing them of the Ashina's rule was no child's play for sure. For here lived people who rejected any higher authority, except that of Tengri, and preferred self-government. A large part of them, however, belonged to the Turkic culture group. It can only be speculated that this was the main reason that prompted Istemi's campaign to the west. The Ashina probably already knew that there were many other Turkic peoples apart from those living around the Altai. And now it was necessary to unite them all under their rule. Istemi began his campaign in the spring of 553. The army of the Gokturks reached the Great Lake Yedisu in the summer. From here, the Gokturks had access to the trade routes of the Silk Road, which ran from China to Persia. Numerous tribes such as the Hun Kayanites now joined the Turks. The Khaganate of the Gokturks thus bordered the empire of the Hephthalites, who were also called the White Huns, and ruled over a wide strip from the Aral Sea to India. Practically between Turkic and Hunnic territory lay the trading city of Bukhara. This ancient settlement blossomed into an important trading metropolis along the Silk Road during the Middle Ages. Even now, in the middle of the 6th century, Bukhara possessed an important influence on trade in the region. Merchants from Byzantium, Iran, and China met here, and regularly exchanged their goods with each other. Bukhara occupied an important economic position along the Silk Road, and would soon stand at the center of a major conflict. On the northwestern front, the Gokturks had to expect a lot less resistance. This region had been a permanent settlement area of Eurasian steppe peoples for centuries, which appeared in the writings of ancient historians like Herodotus.